Teachers of Reddit, what was the worst thing you had to confiscate from a student? My mom has had stories about what she's confiscated from lower elementary aged students, K to 3. The usual prank items like whoopee cushions, sure, but one time a student was playing with this weird box. The box was locked, so she couldn't put it in the confiscated bin. She put it on top of a cabinet. About an hour later, it starts ringing, furiously. It took some doing to get the box open. Turns out this kid's parent was a professional chef, so the kid had grabbed every timer in the house, set them for a max amount of time, locked the box, brought it to school, and played with it so it would get confiscated and ring loudly. Whole class erupted with laughter and screaming. A true agent of chaos. Is the implication that professional chefs have a lot of timers? Do they? Is that true? Surely you don't need more than just one, right? Maybe I don't understand cooking. Story 2. The weirdest one was definitely the fish in a vase they found during locker checks. It was in an unassigned locker someone had added a lock to. Inside was a live betta fish in about as large a vase as you can fit in a locker, fully decorated. Someone had clipped a little booklight to the top of the vase, presumably so the fish wasn't in the dark all the time. No one claimed to know whose it was or how long it had been there, so it lived in the coach's office for at least that year. Story 3. When I was in 5th grade, there was an active market in live bees. Some kids figured out that the weight of the average 5th grader briefly stepping on a bee in the grass would stun it for about a minute without actually ending it. They started going out in teams to scout bees on the field, stun them, and carefully scoop them into plastic sandwich bags. They'd then sell them to other students who would release them into classrooms to waste class time and scare people. You could get honeybees for 25 cents a piece. Bumblebees and yellow jackets cost more. Teachers and school admins started cracking down on this. Teachers literally confiscated live bees in plastic bags from students when found, and they eventually had to start having someone watch the field to catch students in the act. Story 4. In 3rd grade, I once had my entire deck of only holographic Yu-Gi-Oh cards confiscated from me for playing with them during break time too much with friends. I was told I'd be able to get them back when I graduated school, 6th grade. I said okay, not totally understanding what was going on. I forgot about them completely until 9th grade. I went back and asked my old 3rd grade teacher to return my property. Within seconds, she pulls them out of her desk drawer and hands them to me. It was an odd experience. Story 5. My beyond innocent sister was sent to the principal's office for bringing a fake dong to school and making an obscene joke/gesture with it to her teacher. What actually happened was she was drinking these weird protein shots to bulk up for cheerleading or something that we'd gotten from Costco. They came in a long, pink, fairly phallic tube. When her teacher got mad and was like, "What is this?" my sister honestly said, "It's a protein shot," and gestured to drink it. Okay, I got some questions for whoever designed that container. I wish I could see the container that OP is talking about. Like, how phallic are we talking? Story 6. I taught 1st grade and confiscated a piece of broken beer bottle from a 6-year-old. It really surprised me because he was the sweetest kid. Turns out another classmate asked him to bring a weapon and hide it in the playground sand so that he could get back at another kid. I tried to do more life lesson things than suspension for both boys because, hey, they're 6, but school policy had them both suspended for a few days. Story 7. Over the course of years. A. Bottle of vodka hidden in the girls' bathroom by 7th graders. How did you know where to look? Everyone who came back from the bathroom was drunk, so no, you're not as sneaky as you think. B. Vape. My mom gave it to me for allergies, so I'll just give it back to her then. Wide eyes. No! C. Student banging the primers of two 3006 shells together in class. I just wanted to see if they would go off. Story 8. Not a teacher, but I watched quite a funny confiscation while in detention as a sophomore in high school. I was reading a book just trying to make the time go by when our vice principal, who was monitoring detention that day, stepped out for a moment. All of a sudden I hear a cracking sound, and I look up from my book to see a broken egg on the floor. The few kids in the room look around at each other confused. Nobody owns up to it, and nobody knows who did it because we were all distracted when it happened. The vice principal returns, doesn't notice the egg, but he's so engrossed in his paperwork that this kid still gets away with throwing another egg. Everyone looks up. The VP asked, "What's that noise?" And the kid holds up a broken pencil and apologizes. Everyone goes back to minding their business, but all the students now know who the culprit is. Finally, this kid throws one last egg. But unfortunately, the VP looked up from his papers right as he threw it. He walked over to the kid's desk, asked him what he thought he was doing, and the kid goes, "Just cracking jokes." VP holds out his hand and the kid reveals an entire carton of eggs from under his sweatshirt and hands it to him. VP looked so unfazed that I honestly wondered what else this man has seen. I was honestly glad I got detention that day. Story 9. not a teacher, but this is the worst thing I had confiscated. It was 1984 and I was 9 years old. Back then, it was common for parents to buy loads of fireworks for November 5th in Britain, Guy Fawkes Night. I got a load of them around November 1st and emptied them into a cardboard toilet roll that I'd sealed up at one end. Made a fuse from blue touch paper and stuck it in, then used masking tape to seal the top. I was 9. I took it to school and was showing a kid in class during a lesson. The teacher, a guy in his 60s, saw I was distracting people, so called me up and asked what it was. I explained and he confiscated it. At the end of the day, he called me over, told me, "Don't bring stuff into school like that again," and then gave it back to me. And that was the end of the matter, until I set it off a few days later and set fire to a hedge. Kids, the 80s really were a different time. Story 10. So right out of uni, about 25-ish, I took a job teaching at a school in the capital of our country. Lots of poverty and the level of education was low in these teenagers. First day on the job, a kid takes out this hacking knife and starts attacking the furniture with it. For some weird reason, I just walked up to him and demanded he would give it to me, which worked. But it just as easily could have not worked. During the same job, I also had multiple conversations with students about how inappropriate misconduct towards the teacher, me, isn't okay. I also got locked in a classroom with 10 angry male students, including the one from the knife incident. In the end, I left because the administration didn't back me up. Story 11. Not necessarily the craziest thing to confiscate, but the effect that confiscating the item had on the student was pretty upsetting. For background, I'm an elementary special education teacher for students with emotional disabilities and intense behaviors. These students have behaviors that range from yelling, throwing things, and leaving the classroom, to students who have attempted to take their own lives, and students who have assaulted their peers or the school staff. I even had a student go for a cop's gun one time. The student in question was in first grade at the time, and fairly low-key compared to some of the other kids I had. This student and I had a good relationship, as I was one of the only male staff in the building. He lacked a reliable male figure in his life, and for the majority of his kindergarten year, I was the primary teacher working with him. One day, my student had asked to use the restroom, and for most of my students, our staff will escort them to and from, so I went with him. Now, it's been several years, so the details are fuzzy, but somehow it was brought to my attention that there was burnt toilet paper in the boys' restroom. I can't remember if my student or another student told me, but I want to say it was my own student. This sets off some alarms in my head, so I contact my admin team so they're aware. As we're going forward with our day, I notice that my student is fidgety and messing with something in their jacket pocket. So I ask them if I can check their pocket, and instead of saying yes, he pulls out a little Bic lighter and tells me that he found it and asks me to keep it a secret. Of course, I can't just turn a blind eye, so I report it to my admin team and we sit down with the student to talk about fire safety. We explained how playing with the lighters isn't safe, and that he could hurt himself or others if he accidentally started a fire that got out of control. My student feels awful. He's apologizing and feeling remorseful. He admits to us that he's been messing around with lighters at home when his mom was sleeping. We contacted his mother to tell her what had happened and what he had told us, and her response was unfortunate. She was furious with us, told us there was no way that he had brought a lighter, and that it must have been planted by a peer, that we coerced a confession out of him, and that she was pulling him out of school immediately. Within a year, the family's house burned down, and my former student was severely burned in the fire. Story 12. Not mine, but my fiance's coworker confiscated a makeshift shank from a 3rd grader, roughly 8 years old, made from a popsicle stick and a straw. He said he was going to use it on his animals at home. Best part was, when they told the dad, he said, "Oh, why'd you give him the supplies to make a shank?" I assume he's going to end a few people in the future. How does a 3rd grader know what a shank is? Like, what is going on? Also, gotta say, I am a little impressed in the most horrified possible way. And with the dad's response, that is not a promising home environment. Story 13. Again, the other way around. When I was about 10, I wrote a report on beer. I had written to lots of breweries to ask for beer labels and basically described each brewery a little bit. One of the brewery's beers was Verboten Frucht, named after the forbidden fruit. It had a picture of Adam and Eve on it. Well, Eve was quite interesting to all the boys, as you can imagine. Had that label confiscated. I also failed that report. Edit, just to answer some questions. Indeed a Dutch school, but the beer is Belgian. I think I failed the report for too much plagiarism. It did turn out all right, though. I have my own brewery now. Ah, European school. This makes a lot more sense. You try to do something like that in North America? Absolutely not. No school's letting you get away with that. Although I did use vodka for a school project once when I was like 11. But that's a story for another time. Story 14. My mom has been a primary teacher for her whole life in the UK, and the worst incident she had to deal with was a girl aged 10 who was having issues with a boy essentially bullying her. She told her dad, and her dad's solution was to give her a sawn-off shotgun to intimidate the boy. No one knew it was unloaded, but the hell it raised when a 10-year-old schoolgirl brings out a shotgun certainly put the boy off from ever coming near her again. Okay, well, I wouldn't personally recommend doing this, but it was effective, to say the least. Horrifying, but effective. Story 15. I worked as a middle school language teacher. Every kid in class is assigned a Chromebook, and we are encouraged to have the kids work on them. I let them sit together to encourage them to help each other out while they do the same work on their devices. I see two kids at the back of the class giggling and just watching the screen. No reading or writing happening, so I get up slowly and watch them panic. They start frantically clicking the mouse as to close the windows that they weren't supposed to have open. I get to them and ask, "What's so funny?" One of the kids says something about emails, as I take the Chromebook from his desk. The only open tab is in fact the email. I sit down at a free desk close to his and use a trick that I'd learned, which was to reopen tabs that had recently been closed. 1, twice, third time's the charm. Full on P&V adult content video on screen. They found a way to bypass the school board security and were watching adult content in class. So I guess the confiscation of a Chromebook isn't exactly the worst as opposed to what was on it. Story 16. I didn't confiscate anything, but this is a good story nonetheless. One of my high school students, grade 10, so about 16 years old, walked into class and threw his school bag down on the ground beside his desk. About 20 minutes later, as I'm teaching, I smell beer. I called the student who threw his bag down on the ground over to my desk and took him outside into the hall. He told me he has a 6-pack of beer in his bag for a party after school and it broke when he threw his bag down. I told him to go and remove his bag and clean up the mess with a paper towel. I didn't involve admin or call his parents, and the students didn't notice. He got rid of his bag, cleaned up the mess quietly and calmly, and we moved on with our day like nothing happened. Sometimes kids just make bad mistakes, and I could tell this kid was terrified about the consequences. Story 17. Noah teacher. She and her first or second grade class, can't remember which, were on lunch. Lunch lady walks up and tells her one of her students just tried to buy an extra something with over $1,000 in cash, and she had it stuffed in a tiny little coin pouch that looked like a plushy pink duck. Teacher called the girl's house and the mom was 9.8 into a full-blown 10 out of 10 panic after looking for it all morning. This was the early 2000s when it was still normal to pay bills in cash in person. Apparently they forgot to give the girl her allowance, 50 cents, so she took the paper money instead. I mean, good on the lunch lady for not giving into the temptation of just taking the $1,000. Like, obviously you shouldn't, but I'm sure there was at least 1% of her that's like, I could take this right now and no one would know. Well, except the people who were missing it. Story 18. My dad told me he once had to restrain a student and confiscate a pencil sharpener, one of the cheap plastic ones, which he had done a decent job of sharpening his pinky with. My dad has a master's in English and special education. He works with special needs at-risk kids, and has had to take knives and all sorts of stuff from his kids. I just want to give him credit because he deserves it. It's hard, thankless, and no one wants to do it. Story 19. Not me, but a colleague had a kid in class who would regularly drink alcohol in class. His parents would buy it for him, and while he was confiscating a bottle from his school bag, he found a set of homemade, obscene comics the kid had drawn. They were equal measures of horrifying and hilarious. Surreal, intimate stuff including teachers, classmates, and other random people he knew. I just remember one of flying jumbo jet phalluses making emergency landings in various people. The comics were added to a collection of dumb crap kids would draw, and no one made a big deal out of it. OP, you have left out a very important part of this story. How old were the kids? Because this story changes a lot compared to an 8-year-old kid or a 16-year-old. If we're talking younger kid, this is extremely concerning. Story 20. Not a teacher, but in 7th grade, I got caught with a knife. Didn't realize that I had it until I was on the bus. I'd worn this pair of jeans to walk to my buddy's house up the road on Sunday and had my little pocket knife in my pocket. I have an uncle who has always been a whittler/carver and makes really impressive stuff. I'd gotten a small knife and was trying to learn also. Anyway, Monday morning I got up and just threw those same jeans on and hurried to the bus stop. Realized my pocket knife was still in my pocket about halfway to school. In my second period, gym, I told my buddy that I'd accidentally brought my pocket knife to school and didn't know what to do with it. He thought I was kidding him, so he yelled to the coach that I said I had a knife. She patted me down and found it. Straight to jail. Had to wait there for my parents to come pick me up. Got kicked out of school for a month. I didn't have to do any schoolwork during that time, and missing a month of assignments and homework didn't count against me. But the boredom of staying home alone every day watching The Price is Right and soap operas was torture. Story 21. Not a teacher, but my neighbor was a teacher and we would chat regularly. And I asked a very similar question. Worst thing? A knife from a girl in 7th grade. She was being bullied and planned on stabbing several other girls in class. Weirdest, a gumball the size of a melon, as in a huge clump of chewed gum some boy in the 9th grade had been adding to for about a year and kept secret in his locker. Turns out it was a personal project of his, and explained why he was constantly chewing gum all day, every day. Story 22. My wife has had a few knives she's found. Kids act very suspicious and keep checking where they hid them. I think the worst one was the kid with the peanut butter jar. Grade 1, and got a kid with a long report sheet from prep from another school. First week, they had a big talk about how one of the students is highly allergic to peanuts. So, no eating peanut butter for breakfast because it will be on your breath and make the other student sick. During a lineup before school, this kid got a tub of peanut butter and chased this poor girl through the school and smeared it on her. Wife ripped it out of his hands and held him down, while the other teacher raced the girl to the office. She went to the hospital and the boy was expelled. The mum said it was too harsh because boys will be boys. No, sorry ma'am, I think you've got this one wrong. Boys will be boys applies to, I don't know, when they're like kicking mud at each other or whatever. Potentially murdering a classmate doesn't fall into that. Sorry. Story 23. I'm not a teacher, but once I had my backpack confiscated because someone said the weird kid had put something in it. I thought they were calling me weird and got a little annoyed. Turns out the weird kid was trying to steal my snacks. Another time, some kid tried putting a knife in my backpack. I would have gone to jail if the cameras hadn't picked up what was happening and the fact that he did it while surrounded by a hallway full of people. I have no idea why people would always mess with me. Guess it's because they thought I was special needs. Icing on the cake is when I got a useless teacher fired for harassment. He kept telling me to put my phone away. I had a doctor's note that I need to keep it on me in case of a medical emergency. I had diabetes, so a lot of rules got bent. The guy took my phone out of my pocket, then got into my locker and just went through my things without the principal's approval. Took some of my stuff and didn't report it. A Game Boy I bought off of Amazon. My wallet disappeared, but that was probably another student because he left the door open. And a couple days later I was in the lunchroom and he comes up to me questioning me like I'm a convict, and then grabs my insulin pump out of my hands. While he's looking at it, I'm sitting there wondering, what the hell, and thinking of ways to screw with the guy. Turns out, I didn't have to, as he walked off with it still attached to me. I got up to follow as I didn't want it to get ripped out. He turned around and saw my deadpan expression and immediately said I was going to try and stab him. Apparently he thought I was crazy. Nope, but I did point to my pump in his hands. The dude put on a smug face and just yanked it. In doing so, he pulled out the cord. It wasn't surgically implanted, but it did hurt and started bleeding when he did. Nurse saw this and went off on him, while some of the students called the cops. Dude got fired right then and there, and I got to chill out at home for a few days. I hope he tells that last story way too casually. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm just a friggin' softie or something, but this teacher sounds like the devil incarnate. Like, confiscating your stuff without approval or anything is already bad, right? Obviously. Pulling out your insulin pump? What was going through his mind? This man should not work around children ever again. Or maybe anyone? I don't know. I don't know what his deal is. Story 24. I was in high school and someone, or a rogue band of someones, had figured out a way to load a Halo emulator onto the school-wide network drive. Obviously, the higher-ups of the school didn't like this one bit and took it down. This began a war that ultimately was won by whomever loved Halo enough to share it with the world. It was weeks of back and forth, and the IT department was so annoyed with it that we came back from summer break and they had completely revamped the school's network. There was a supposed file locker that only the highest of highs could make changes to, and it was where the beloved folder lay to support Halo. I'm not tech savvy, so I don't understand, but somehow this was also touted as a way for the entire school district to have easy access to materials. This meant, of course, it was only a matter of time until Halo popped up in the super secret private folder and it was playable again. For reference, my district at the time of going to high school back in 2015 had like 12 high schools, absolutely massive. In the end, the IT department for the district waved the white flag, I think, and Halo is still on the district network. Story 25. When I was in 2nd grade, this girl had a crush on me, so she passed me a note. Don't remember what it said, but the teacher confiscated it and read it out loud to the whole class. I don't remember what it said, but I remember the exchange like it was yesterday. Me. I wrote that. Teacher. You wrote this note to yourself? Me. Yeah? Have you met me? I'm the best. Apparently, she didn't appreciate my 7-year-old snark and called my mom. She was not happy. At her, not me. I got ice cream that day. I think I remember trying to talk to that girl a few times, but she was really embarrassed. Real playground drama stuff, you know? Besides, I was 7. Girls had the ick. Story 26. Just before Christmas, we did a big locker clean out. Some grade 9s were raising cane-toed tadpoles in their locker in a Gatorade bottle. They were, quote-unquote, feeding them energy drinks. Cane toads are a massive problem here in Queensland. They're pests that can dramatically reduce populations of native insects, frogs, reptiles, and other small creatures. Their skin contains toxic venom, and it can end native animals as well as pets. For environmental reasons, we turfed them on the ground and squished them. Story 27. A teacher once confiscated a brick from me when I was 5 or 6. At that time, me and a friend of mine would collect stones and see them as power. So when I saw a huge brick, I thought, oh, no way my friend can bring more power than that. Yeah, I was stupid. When I was in 7th grade, I had made a taser or something like that with a 15-volt battery, which my friend and I would use to give little electric shocks to other children during departure. One day, I accidentally torched a teacher and never saw my brilliant device again. OP, where did you keep the brick? Did you just carry it into school, thinking no teacher would have anything to say about it? Actually, you know what? Maybe I'm being a little too harsh on a 5 or 6-year-old. I get it, OP. Big rocks? They're pretty cool. The taser, though? Yeah, that one deserves to get taken away. Story 28. I did have a child walking around brandishing something in their pocket and saying it was metal and it was going to cut other children. He threatened a few before I managed to get it off of him, and it was a plastic lightsaber that came free in cereal. I also had a near-identical replicant of the Death Note, made with my details filled in perfectly. She was very upset that I didn't actually smash my head on the pavement at 10:30 a.m. I teach 10-year-olds. Story 29. A journal. It detailed exactly how he was going to end each of his family members, including his baby sister, with the diagrams and steps. It also included how he would hide that he did it, including, "I'll burn this book and cry a lot. I'm only 7, how could I do that to my own family?" People are easy to fool. There were a lot of other diagrams and such in there of other people he would end. It was brutal. He had to be sent away for help as he was considered an immediate threat to just about everyone. He was too young at the time, but they were looking at potential antisocial personality disorder for him. Story 30. Not a teacher, but in 4th grade I lived in a small town in Nebraska. There wasn't much to do other than ride bikes around with your friends and find trouble. No idea why I did this, but we had garden snakes that we would catch and we would try to keep them as pets in an ice chest. The one that I had apparently passed, but I figured it was just sleeping. I placed it in a gallon Ziploc bag, poked some holes in it, and put some grass in. I thought garden snakes ate grass. I put it in my backpack and took it to school to show my friends my pet snake. Well, a teacher caught me pulling the bag out of my backpack and freaked out. I didn't get in too much trouble other than my parents getting called. But I figured if that teacher were to see this Reddit post, they would say they confiscated a dead snake from an odd 4th grader. Story 31. Teen girl's phone. The phone itself was pretty normal, but it was what was on it. She was sitting at a desk with some boys crowded around her phone, all of them laughing, and I caught sight of some girl's nudes on it. Not the girl who owned the phone. I didn't get a good look, but it was quite a large girl in the pic. Don't know who it actually was or how she got these, but it had been shown around to a lot of other kids as far as I know. I felt terrible for the girl in them. She shouldn't have taken those pics, but she didn't deserve to have them shown around and laughed at. Also, this was my first week working in a high school, and the girl with the phone then got suspended for threatening to follow me to my car and attack me because her phone got confiscated. Story 32. A syringe. Cheeky little bastard took it right out at the end of class, too. Tried to bullcrap me a story about blood sugar or something, like I'm gonna fall for that. Even had his mom come down screaming about hospitals and lawyers, telling me I should have just believed him. Yeah, nice try, Karen. I have a zero-tolerance policy on drugs in my class. I usually cut out joke ones that aren't sticking to the prompt, but this one was short enough and, in my opinion, funny enough that we're leaving it in. If you're here for serious answers to the question, sorry. Story 33. Not the worst, but definitely my favorite. I taught 4th graders and saw a couple of them passing around a sheet of paper to each other instead of doing whatever they were supposed to be doing. I took the note from them and one of the kids' faces looked as if her life was over, and she started begging me not to look at it. I unfolded it to see what they were writing about. The note was filled with the drawings of cartoon butts, and they told me they wanted to have a contest to see who was the best at drawing them. Story 34. I live in South Africa. What's normal is knives and various weapons. I have a drawer full. Then one day a kid brought a gun to school, albeit a hunting rifle. I lived in a farming town. He wanted to sell it at school. Unfortunately, definitely not allowed, and I had to take it away. He got expelled, and I felt bad about that, but come on, who brings a gun to school? Story 35. A student wrote a message about me, that he would love to bang me in the butt, suck my breasts, and really specific examples of what he would do to me. He got counseling and had to write me an apology letter. The worst part of it was that he stayed in my class the rest of the year and sat in front to watch me lecture. Other than that, he was a very bright, polite kid with glasses. I even had to hand him his science fair trophy. On a somewhat serious and genuine note, I hope that counseling did this kid well. I don't know how he got to thinking stuff like that. We also don't know how old this kid was, too. If it's like a 12th grader, then it's just more inappropriate than, like, concerning. Well, concerning, but in a different way. But if it were a younger kid, I really do hope the counseling went well, and that he can regulate how he thinks and treats people. I don't know. Basically what I'm saying is, this is sort of behavior that can be corrected. And I hope it was. Story 36. Bullets buried in melted chocolate in a 4th grader's duffel bag. What made it annoying was that we needed to get his textbook and notebooks out of there before they were ruined. But this student also had a problem with incontinence, so I wasn't sure what I was dealing with at first. The tragic coda is that the boy had brought the box of rifle ammo to school as a way of remembering hunting trips with his father, as his father had recently taken his own life with a handgun. This is one of the several reminders I've had that students can be coming to school with some dark backstories. Story 37. My stepdad has been an administrator at a middle school for years. Once he had a pretty notorious student come into the office looking for a scooter that had been abandoned/confiscated. He saw it, swore to high heaven it was his, and no one believed him on reputation. They pulled out the little removable handlebars and found a bag of weed stashed inside. See? That's mine! Story 38. Not a student, but the student who got the item confiscated. It's nothing crazy or anything, but back in 8th grade we had an arms race for paper hornets. Paper hornets are pieces of paper folded as many times on itself as possible, and then compressed into a V shape. We'd use these in combination with elastics and shoot them at each other. Now anybody can make a paper hornet, it's not hard. But it isn't easy to make a great one. I, however, made, and can still make, very, very hard paper hornets. Basically a chunk of wood flying at you at Mach Jesus. Because of this, many people would ask me to make them paper hornets. They would pay me in gum, gummy snacks, Dunkaroos, etc. The better the payment, the more time I would invest in the project. So near the end of this war, getting caught shooting paper hornets would result in missing recess. It eventually escalated to suspension, but thankfully I dropped out of the race just before that. Just. People started adding staples to the end to draw blood or increase hardness, so I was out. Anyway, my friend, fake name, Max, wanted an order of like 20. Gave me 6 packs of fruit gummies as payment, and I proceeded to get to work. These were the hardest ones I've ever made. They were reinforced with paper clips so they wouldn't lose their shape and everything. Like I said before, he wasn't my only client, so as I was making them in my desk, I caught the teacher's attention. He asked what I was doing and I said, nothing. He came over and I shoved my current hornet I was working on in my desk. He asks again and I say nothing and raise my hands, to which he grabs the lip of my desk and lifts it to reveal around 150 paper hornets. All different. Thick, thin, reinforced, regular, etc. There was no escaping it now. He sent me to the office and confiscated all of them. The arms race was over. Anyone caught with a paper hornet would be suspended, and anyone seen with an elastic band had their desk searched. All because of these little pieces of paper. Not gonna lie, I missed that. So, if I'm not mistaken here, OP, you were a middle school arms dealer? And he had morals. He wouldn't put the staples on the end to draw blood. Would I be out of line to say that that's cool as hell? Well, too bad, I'm doing it anyway. Story 39. Kratom, crack, benzos, and an ounce of weed. This was all at once from one student who was trying to sell drugs to me, his teacher. I confiscated it, but I'm not going to say what happened after because it may be hard for some to understand why I did what I did. And no, I didn't take it home or keep it or sell it, nor did I alert the school admin. The student was an idiot, but he could have been seriously hurt or lost his life for losing those drugs, because he had no money to replace them. In some schools, the rules don't always apply because the neighborhoods are dominated by gangs, and teachers have to be very careful not to put students in harm's way, even when those students have broken serious rules. Ultimately, this incident gave me the opportunity to have a real talk with this kid, and explain to him how and why his life choices were going to ruin his life. He began to move away from the gang life and graduated a couple years later without any further issues. Story 40. My teacher was hosting the Russian state exam, it's like the SAT, and there was this guy who went through the metal detector and it showed he had metal on him. However, he had taken his phone out. So he takes off his belt, but the arc still shows he has something metal. And then it kind of hits him. He's like, "Oh, I forgot," and takes out a huge hunting knife attached to his knee. I don't know how he genuinely forgot he had a hunting knife on him. Story 41. Not a teacher nor my story, but when my mum was sitting her final maths exam at the end of high school, she had brought in a dried frog's leg in a plastic bag. She got it from a biology lab as a good luck charm and named it Socrates, which she wrote on the bag and placed it on her desk. Halfway through the exam, the teacher comes over and confiscates it, threatening to fail her on the exam because of cheating resources. Story 42. When I was in 7th grade, a teacher confiscated a manga I was reading because it had an assault scene in it. I didn't even know it was in there. I hadn't gotten to that part yet. The manga was laying on the table. She grabbed it and flipped through it and lost her crap when she saw that. Got it back a week later with a broken spine, still mad at them, after they'd shown it to all of the teachers and called my mom about it. My mom was like, "Yeah, I know she has that. I bought it. If it's something that encourages my daughter to want to learn about a new culture, I don't care." Story 43. Not a teacher, but the student. When I was in 8th grade, my English teacher, Mrs. Labate, saved my life. I was going through a rough time at home. Had just found out I was adopted by my grandparents. My days consisted of being bullied at school, coming home crying, writing poetry, and harming myself. Then I would go to sleep under the covers and by flashlight read to escape this world and travel to another in my mind. The day was like any other. Long sleeves, head stuck in my notebook, writing away. She waited till class was over to call me up. She looked me in the eyes and told me what a brilliant young woman I was, and asked if she could see what I was writing. It was just a book of poems, so I let her. The look in her eyes after she read a few, I'll never forget. I rarely saw that look of concern, but not anger, when I was younger. That ended up being the catalyst for the events in my life. The police got involved, I got sent to a mental hospital, my whole life flipped. It took me a long time to see in the moment, but I figured out it flipped for the better. She was more than a teacher. She was a friend. Story 44. I taught 2nd grade for a minute. We used to do the Shel Silverstein poem, "What's in the Sack?" for show and tell. The kids would take the sack home, we would recite the poem to them, and at the end we would say, "What's in the sack? What is it?" The kids loved it. This darling little farm boy in my class was giddy all day and kept telling me I will love his surprise. So when he gets up and we finish the poem, he says dramatically, "I brought a lucky rabbit's foot." He pulls up his shirt and tied to his belt loop is a clean tampon. Clearly he's been rubbing it for luck. Before I can react, he says, "And I brought one for everybody." He opens the bag and there are 20 unwrapped tampons ready to be handed out so everyone can have their own good luck. We all clapped and then I pulled him aside and asked him if they were his. He lowers his eyes and says, "No." So I told him he couldn't give them away. I called his mom. She was super young and mortified, but we had a good laugh. And I took a picture of his huge grin after his proud moment for her to use as a hilarious story later. One of my favorite teaching days ever. Story 45. One of my fellow pupils had a Let's Go Home device that was basically a power plug where he connected the wires. He was caught before being able to try it. He behaved suspiciously when he tried to plug it in during class. Also, Polish firework crackers that pupils would flush down the toilets, with the intent to make neighboring toilets erupt while people sat on them. Story 46. Back in the 80s when I was in 2nd grade, a 5th grader had brought in a lunch bag filled with pieces of raw jalapenos. During lunch, he and a friend were going around to the younger kids offering them candy and then laughing at their reaction. The gym teacher caught them and made the kid eat the entire bag. Today, I'm sure the teacher would have been fired. In the 80s, he was a hero. As has been said before, the 80s were a different time. Story 48. A gun. My mom is a teacher, and she used to work at night teaching in a school that was in a really, really bad place. One night she gets home, takes a revolver from her purse and says, "I'm gonna keep this until tomorrow, then I'll have to give it back to the little crap." When I asked the story behind all that, she told me the student of hers had taken the gun to school to show how badass he is to his friends and the girls, and he pulled it in the middle of her class. She then made him choose between him handing the gun over to her to have it returned the next day or calling the police. With the support of nearly everyone in the class, she took it from him, and as promised, the next day after he apologized to the class for doing that, he got his gun back. P.S. Now that I wrote it down, I realized it sounds like the most absurd lie someone could ever come up with. But here are some points to clarify. 1. I am Brazilian. Brazil is a country where weird crap happens. 2. My mom is the kind of teacher that every student respects, and on top of that, she is a very scary 1.56 meter high woman. 3. Some of her students were gangsters for real. They too came to school armed and everyone knew that. They were just smart enough to keep it hidden. 4. These gangster students liked my mom a lot and always walked her out of the school to a safer place when there was any danger. So they had her back in that situation. Story 49. My friend had to confiscate 2 dead birds and a rat from a kid's bag. His dad was a hipster taxidermist, and he was nonverbal, and she thinks he was trying to impress him. She said he fought like hell to stop them taking it away. They never found out where they came from. The parents were super lovely and helpful, by the way, just a little bit weird in their hobbies. Story 50. Not a teacher, but I had a teacher once who used to regale us with stories of teaching at a pretty rough school around London when she was fresh out of training. There was one kid who maybe had some undiagnosed learning disabilities. He could be a bit unpredictable, but he latched onto her as a confidant of sorts. This boy used to do odd things like catching pigeons outside and then letting them loose in the classroom to show everyone what he'd caught. So he was harmless, usually. One day he comes into her classroom and talks to her about how a girl he likes has turned him down. And he says, "But I'm going to fix it, miss. Look." Opens the bag to show her an honest-to-God gun. She said she has no idea how she stayed calm, but she convinced him to leave the bag with her for safekeeping. And then when he had left the classroom, she just ran like hell for the head teacher's office with it. She didn't tell us what happened to the boy, but obviously him getting access to a gun in that area was a massive red flag, as it could mean all sorts of issues, from parents being an organized crime to him being groomed by a gang, etc. So I think it all got turned over to police and social services. Story 51. Oh geez, I used to teach at a boarding school whose clientele was mostly second chance kids coming from rehab and other misfits and rejects. And I say that last part with endearment. Items I confiscated/directed disposal of at some point. A teenage boy's pacifier collection, a shoebox full of used rubbers, a high-resolution photograph of a vulva blown up to a 24 by 36 poster size, and hey, the resolution and detail was impressive, I'll admit, a video CD of tentacle adult Japanese content, a 2-liter Sprite bottle filled with some opaque pink liquid. Kids were trying to homebrew alcohol using Kool-Aid packets as the sugars. A handwritten list of every single girl in the school done by a small group of boys who ordered them according to their perceived attractiveness. $12,600 in crisp $100 bills. Rich international student kept his shopping money in an unsealed envelope in his dorm room desk. And an anime adult content body pillow. That's all I can think of off the top of my head. Wild times. Story 52. I'm a tech ed teacher, and occasionally I get the kid who's also a tinkerer. Here are the things I've had to confiscate from just a single kid. 1. Homemade stun gun made from an old TV remote. He soldered enough capacitors onto it that it could make an entire arm go numb. 2. Homemade 5-watt laser pointer. He combined a flashlight and a diode laser into a device capable of setting paper on fire and leaving permanent burn marks into his desk. 3. Miniature steam-powered pencil launcher. Think mini potato gun. Pour in some water, heat the back with a 9-volt powered wire coil, open valve, pew pew. 4. Arm-mounted, low-profile locking slingshot. Made mostly from wood, Velcro, and surgical tubing. He had it hidden in his jacket sleeve. It launched a 12mm steel bearing with enough force to chip a cinder block wall. 5. The least dangerous one. A personal pleasure device made from a LiPo battery and the vibrating component of a foot massager. There was a lot of drama involved by the time he left middle school, and we had to modify our curriculum a bit to prevent him from learning how to use 3D printers. Funny thing was that he was a great kid with an interest who thought this kind of stuff was cool. He never once wanted to harm someone. He just wanted to show people what he could make. After 8th grade, I helped him get into a STEM magnet school. Last I heard, he's thriving there, and has learned a little bit about what's appropriate and what isn't to bring to school. Okay, I had no idea this kid was going to be in middle school. That's crazy impressive. This child, as long as he keeps everything in check and doesn't go all mad scientist, has a very bright future ahead of him, as long as he keeps getting instructors and tutors like UOP who encourage his interests. Story 53. Me and a few friends had these plastic cockroaches that looked quite realistic if you're not examining them up close. We used to put them in our mouths and then pull them out during lunch to freak people out. They got confiscated, but we got them back later. I still have one pinned to an old pencil case somewhere, and I'm 36 now. Story 54. I didn't confiscate it, but our principal did. A student thought it would be a good idea to bring his gun to school because he was selling it to someone right after. Another student saw it in his backpack in the library and told the librarian. They brought him to the office where the SRO and principal confiscated it. Somehow, some way, he wasn't expelled and ended up coming back to school later that year. Story 55. So, I teach high school. I have had to confiscate masks because kids found a way to saw chunks out of the desks and chairs. I had to find an alternative very quickly, but now I and many other teachers have chairs and desks with large chunks missing. I've also had to confiscate a phone with Tinder installed because a senior was trying to find love in this lonely world. After this, another student shouted, "You just want to get your dong sucked, calm down." I swear to you, this first part of the post says masks. I don't know what I'm missing, but how are people sawing chunks out of desks and chairs? Anyway, moving on. Story 56. A kitten from a student who had previously ended a cat, a vibe from a third grader who brought it from home, it was mom's, and a lube from a student who thought it was hand sanitizer. He was continuously rubbing his hands, saying, "This is so slippery and smells good," then had peers smell his hands. Story 57. This isn't a confiscation, but rather something a teacher had to see. My sister and I were good friends with one of our high school English teachers, as we were both friends with her daughters. Recently, we heard through the grapevine. Teacher told her daughter, who told my sister, who told me, something that one of the biology teachers saw in his classroom while we attended the school. It was his human anatomy lab, and they were on the cells unit. In order to describe simple squamous epithelium, he had students do the cheek swab. You take a toothpick and kind of rough up the inside of your cheek, then go in with a Q-tip and grab some of the loose cells before smearing them onto a tray to look at under a microscope. The microscopes at this public school were of course kind of old and finicky, so the students had to ask for the teacher's help to focus the lenses and see their swabs pretty often. One girl called him over to help her see hers, but when he adjusted it for her, he saw clear as day, there were simple squamous epithelium, but also some cells with flagella. Now, you may be aware the only flagellated cells in the human body are seed cells. So basically, this girl got her cheek swab and had the girl check it only to discover that she had seed cells in her cheek. I was quite unhappy to hear this information, primarily because that was me when I was a senior. I can't come up with any comments or excuses. Yeah, there was a straight up seed cell in my cheek swab and the teacher saw. All these years I was hoping he hadn't noticed when he was adjusting the microscope for me. Alas, it seems he was more than aware and told the other teachers about it. Although I'm sure he doesn't reveal my identity with his juicy story. Poor high school teachers. They do not get paid enough. OP, I can't tell you how brave you are to say the last part of this story. At no point did I think this was going to be about you. And hey, respect for owning up to it. Unfortunate that the teacher saw. But hey, life goes on. Story 58. Not a teacher, but in the 4th grade, I was collecting those little lunch milk cartons to pop at the end of the year. So every day I'd just put 1 or 2 more in there. Well, I didn't clean them. And at about month 2 or 3, the teacher was alerted because it stank of sour milk. I was caught and assigned to take them to the dumpster. I was allowed to pick a friend, so my buddy Aaron, who I'd been conspiring with, came out and helped me get rid of them. We ended up popping them in the parking lot and throwing them away after. Honestly, a great memory. Side note, we did stink of sour milk the rest of the day. Story 59. I was the student, grade 6. I used to carry Gatorade powder mix that I would make in a 2-liter Coke bottle and had a Ziploc bag of sugar to sweeten it. I was suspended for a week for possession and distribution of Coke. Several students claimed I let them try the Coke. Police got involved, but my parents couldn't stop laughing. Story 60. I'm not a teacher, but in 4th grade I found my mom's vibe and took it to school not knowing what it was. I handed it off to everyone on the school bus and then got the bus stopped so I could be taken off and suspended from riding the bus for a month, and also got a 2-month detention. I can't even imagine the embarrassment my mother went through when she was called in and had to leave work. I mean, hey, it went brr, and I thought it was funny. Okay, just want to say, it's so stupid that OP was ever suspended for this. To be suspended, I feel like the kid has to know they were doing something wrong, or actively harming another child. This did nothing of the sort. OP had no clue what that was. In fact, even the implication that the school thought that OP knew what that was is wrong. And I don't mean just wrong as in incorrect, I mean wrong as in like weird. I don't know, this one makes me mad. Why was OP ever punished for that? Not their fault remotely. Story 61. was a middle school in-school suspension teacher. I saw most of the bad kids pretty frequently. I tried to treat them with the same amount of respect they afforded me. As a result, I had several kids confide in me. This one kid in particular was a frequent flyer in ISS. He was a 6th grader, maybe 11 or 12. One day he comes up to me and says, "Hey, coach, this dude gave me this in the parking lot this morning. He also sent me this." Proceeds to hand me a bag of Coke and show me adult content screenshots on his phone. He said the dude in the parking lot wants to bang his sister 8th grader and asked if my student could make that happen. And if he could, he would give the kid more drugs. Took the kid to the office, and the folks at the office knew who I was talking about. But here's the weird part. They called the cops, had them pull this dude over, and told him to leave the county. If he came back, he would be arrested. And that's it. That's how they treated it. I've never heard of anything like it, but hey, based on the reputation of this town/county, nothing would surprise me. Story 62. I was the student, but I'd done an electronics project for an engineering class that was basically a universal infrared and radio control. I made it as a project to prove that electrical garage doors aren't secure, but accidentally discovered I could also turn off every projector in the building with it. I had a lot of fun doing this with my friends for a couple of days until my engineering teacher caught on. He confiscated it, but still gave me a good grade on the project because he was a cool guy. He gave it back to me on the day before graduation, and I used it to turn off the projector during grad rehearsal. Story 63. My wife had 2 incidents when she was in primary school. The first was being caught with a scalpel that she brought in to dig up a rock. She got it from a science set. The second was a bullet she found on the beach, which resulted in the school being evacuated and armed police called to deal with it. She just thought it was cool and wanted to show it off. Story 64. Not technically confiscating, but when I was still a pre-service teacher and the cops went to school because of drug-related searches, I noticed a kid hurried to the bathroom and was trying to dispose of something. I caught him, but I took the drugs, weed, and told him to come see me after class. I threw the weed and gave him a serious talk. I understood where he came from. Bad neighborhood, neglectful parents, fell into a bad crowd, but I knew he was good. I talked to him that this is your one and only golden ticket and that he needed to straighten up. About 3 months after I completed my pre-service training, he regularly attended classes and decided to join the varsity team. Before I left, he said thank you, and that was it. Last I heard, he graduated and is working hard to get into university. Story 65. Pupil rather than teacher. But when I was about 8 years old, I thought my younger sister's Calpol syringe was nifty. No idea why. So I brought it into school. But it fell out of my pocket during assembly. The teachers later found it and asked whose it was. But despite the fact it didn't even have a needle, I overthought it. And I panicked thinking that the teachers thought it was drug-related, so I never owned up. Of course, as an adult, I realized that the thought that an 8-year-old would be shooting up probably didn't cross their minds, and they just wanted to return this presumably important piece of medical paraphernalia. Story 66. 5th grade math and science teacher here, but this was when I was a math specialist, so I worked with all grades. My favorites. 1st grader, envelope with $1,800 cash. 3rd grader, vape cartridge with the words cotton candy daddy juice printed on the side. 4th grader, a taxidermy animal leg, yes, just the leg. And 6th grader, my personal favorite, a Ziploc bag filled with used birthday candles. Story 67. Obligatory not a teacher, but when I was in my last or second last year at school, there was a bunch of chemicals stolen from the chem department, and every morning it was in the assembly announcements asking if anyone knew. After about a week or so, it turned out to be a bunch of first years, and they were mixing highly dangerous chemicals in their lockers and burnt through the bottom of theirs into someone else's. They got into a lot of trouble once what was left and what was made got confiscated. Story 68. My friend in 5th grade brought a whole vial of mercury to school to show us. We were watching him play with it in his hand, huddled together on the playground, when a teacher came over to see what was up. "Tony, you're not supposed to play with that. It's poisonous. Where did you get it?" Turns out he had a whole bucket of it at home. His dad helped to demo an old hospital and broke all the thermometers to take all the mercury and gave it to his kid to play with. Story 69. Wasn't the teacher, but the student in question. In middle school, I'd gotten some of these stink bombs as a gag gift from a friend. I decided to bring them to school to show some friends. Later in the day, a very hot, late spring day, a teacher got on my nerves out in a small, poorly ventilated annex building. I went into the bathroom, primed one up, and slid it into an air vent. Stunk for a few solid days. Plan ended up backfiring as the in-school suspension room was also in the annex. Story 70. Not a teacher, but the craziest crap that went down in my school was the quote-unquote bong threat. So basically a bong was found in a locker. Our school was full of jerks who liked to involve the police for this kind of thing. So one of the staff members called the cops. They used the emergency line, 911, because to them, this was the end of the world. Well, on the telephone, the words bong and bomb sound very similar. The school told the operator they found a bong in a locker. The operator is like, holy crap. A dispatch call went out that there was a confirmed bomb found in the high school. Cue every type of emergency service in existence surrounding the building. Bomb squad, SWAT team, fire trucks, a fleet of ambulance, hazmat, every cop in 3 counties, 5 news crews, helicopters, you name it. Crap was crazy. The weirdest part is that most of the staff now believed there was a bomb in the building as well, and they decided the best course of action was, well, not to evacuate, but to lock us all in the building in the gym with books over our heads. Like, that's a better choice than, I don't know, going outside. Story 71. This story is actually about an inability to confiscate, but still a good one. I work as a teacher in the UK and lots of our schools are old enough to be built before people were aware of the dangers of asbestos. The toilet that is reserved for the older students has asbestos in the ceiling. However, it's not close enough to pose a health risk as long as it remains undisturbed. The students know this, so they hide their vapes, weed, cigarettes, and God knows what else above the ceiling panels. The teachers aren't allowed to go up there for health and safety reasons, so the only way we could confiscate those items is to hire a specialist asbestos team. Devious bastards. Respect to them. Okay, so, if I'm getting this right, teenagers hid their vapes, weed, cigarettes, all things that can famously cause lung cancer, in asbestos, another thing that can famously cause lung cancer. I'm no mathematician, but lung cancer squared sounds pretty bad. A quick revision on what I said. Okay, I looked it up. Mesothelioma, not a lung cancer. Sorry. Cancer that is related to the lungs. Either way, I don't think they're playing their odds very well, basically. Story 72. As a student, my parents went to an estate sale and picked up old photo albums from World War II era, like 6 of them. Confirmed multiple times it was cool to take. So many photos. Hurt soldiers, pic of FDR, pics of Germany, France, etc., black and white, and 5 Hitler postcards. Anyway, I went to show it to my history teacher and another teacher saw it and said, "I know who these belong to," and took them. I was in 7th grade. Still freaking mad she did that. Story 73. A teacher confiscated an adult content CD from me when I was young in high school. Apparently one of the teachers fainted when they saw it. Funny thing was, it wasn't even mine. I was just unlucky enough that the thing was on my table when the kids were passing it around. They were just looking at the cover of a half-nude Chinese chick, but I gave up explaining since even at that age I knew no one's gonna believe it wasn't mine. Lucky enough the kid that brought it to school admitted to it and took the blame. Still got a decent whooping though. Good times. Story 74. I was the kid, but I started smoking weed at a young age. And someone said they thought I was high or someone smelled it at school, but I was good friends with the security guard. She was a lovely woman and took care of all of us troubled kids. The principal told her to come get me from class and she did it by herself. And when she pulled me out, she looked at me and asked, "Do you have to go to the bathroom before we go?" And I looked at her confused, like, "What?" And she said it again and was like, "I think you need to use the restroom." And it clicked in my head, she was letting me dump my weed. I thanked her so much and did what she told me, and she took me to the office and they had a cop there search me, and they found nothing. Such an amazing woman. Still see her to this day. Story 75. Not me, but a school in my district just had 3 7th graders OD on fentanyl. One collapsed during gym, had to be revived by the school nurse and taken to the hospital where he died 2 days later. When they brought in the drug-sniffing dogs, they found over 40 packages of the stuff that police said was 50 times more potent than the fentanyl they normally find in the area. Apparently even touching the stuff can make someone OD. This happened middle of last week and the whole school is still shut down while they decontaminate and investigate. Story 76. I taught middle school science in a Title I poor urban school from 2010 to 2015 and then got out. One day I see a kid looking at an iPod during a test. This was before every middle schooler had an iPhone, so iPods were somewhat popular. Anyway, I go over and confiscate the iPod. But I can tell something is off about this kid's expression and demeanor. But I've got too much going on in the classroom to be bothered by it. Also, it's a Friday, so I put the iPod in my pocket and tell him he can get it back later. I get home that evening and realize, the iPod is still in my pocket. Remembering the odd look on the kid's face, I turn on the screen. I am greeted by adult content. Gay adult content. 2 dudes and a couch. I turn it off immediately and discreetly return the iPod to the kid on Monday. I had no interest in outing the kid to anyone, especially not a principal. I think he was grateful for the discretion, and we always had a good relationship from then on. OP, hey, you did a good thing that day. Realizing that something like that could really affect a kid's life, that's a level of sensitivity I hope all teachers have, even if I know it's not true. Story 77. Not a teacher, but back when I was in high school, a friend of mine thought it would be hilarious to print off a load of scat adult content and bring it to school to show people. Unsurprisingly, someone told a teacher and it got confiscated. His mom called into the school, and then a very awkward meeting discussing the pictures in detail ensued, with my friend desperately trying to explain he thought it was funny and that he didn't get off on it. Story 78. I was on basketball court duty before school one day. A 6th grader came up to me and said an older boy had swiped his backpack that he'd removed and placed near the court, and went to the bathroom. I go to the bathroom, find the nearly emptied backpack, and take it to the kid. He starts crying because his new phone is missing along with his lunch. I called the principal, filled him in, and he checked the video feeds. The thief was a frequent flyer in the office, so the principal ID'd him immediately. He goes outside the office and sees the kid eating a sandwich and trying to open an iPhone. For good measure, the boss went and opened the thief's locker. He found a very large Bowie knife and a list of mostly female students and a couple of female teachers that the idiot helpfully labeled victim list. The police were called and he was arrested on a theft and weapons charge. He was expelled, and we later heard that he was shipped off to Texas to live with his grandparents. One of the office staff went over to McDonald's later and brought the original victim lunch. Story 79. Not a teacher, but I think this had to have been the wildest thing. Literally, my 7th grade math teacher had to confiscate. It was right after lunch/recess and we started class. But then the teacher noticed some commotion in the back of the room. One of the kids caught a snake on the playground and brought it into class and was showing it to his buddies. Then it bit him and got loose. It was a harmless snake, but my teacher freaked the hell out, and so did half the class as this poor snake wiggled around the room. She managed to find a small box, and me and a few students offered to catch it. I got it and dropped it in the box. She released it outside, much to the disappointment of the kid who brought it. I don't remember much from my earlier years in school, but the snake incident of 7th grade was definitely a highlight. Story 80. Middle school, working as a language assistant. Teacher is up giving a lesson, and there's these 3 little dudes who must have watched some TikTok or something that taught them how to make some kind of little crossbow out of rubber bands, paper clips, and some kind of tube they found, and they were firing these little wooden skewers. I'm confiscating these from them all day. Lord knows where they were hiding the supplies, but they kept building them. Finally, I've had enough. I confiscate for the 4th time that day, and I've had it. I tell them this is their last chance. If they build another, straight to the principal. And I'm writing notes in their agendas. That's a relatively serious thing here in France. They demand to know why I don't want them to be making them if they were being quiet while doing it. I explain that 1, not doing their work, and 2, they could hurt someone. They say, fine, and I separate them into different parts of the room, making them leave everything but a pencil and paper in a corner, and I leave them to help someone else during the activity. Not 5 minutes later, we hear a blood-curdling scream, and somehow they had made or passed another one to the ringleader, and he had shot it straight into another kid's ear. He's bleeding. The teacher takes him out of class, and I'm in charge. I put that room on nuclear lockdown. Kid is taken to the hospital with no lasting damages, thank goodness. The teacher and principal have their talking to with the students, and then the principal says that it's my turn. I see them sitting in her office through the window. I make sure I'm seen through the window, and I just sit outside of the office. They sweat it out. I walk in, sit down, and wait even longer in silence. What was Mr. OP's first rule when he became our assistant? I had 2 as a language assistant. 1, don't do anything to bother other students, and 2, we don't make fun of language errors. Don't bother other students? Do you think the student who was shot in the ear was bothered? Yeah. To be fair, they genuinely felt bad. My punishment after that was making them write apology letters in English. And they took their own initiative with their parents to buy the kid they shot a bunch of Pokemon cards worth more than gold in that school, and they went over to their house to deliver it. Every kid listened to me when I said to put something away for the rest of the year after that. Oh, finally, a video that ends on a story that isn't traumatic or sad or something. Because, yes, that is the final story we have for today. But this is great. One of the more dramatic examples of, a kid actually getting hurt. But these kids realized what they did was wrong and learned from it. Because these guys were what? Middle school, 5th grade maybe? They don't really fully understand what they're doing and how it could affect other people. So to learn from it and make it right, even though it did take a pretty bad mistake, is good. These kids are going to grow up to be more well-adjusted and more compassionate because of this. Not saying that shooting someone and then feeling bad about it later is the only way to get there, just that it was their way to get there. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.